Chapter 10. Disaster. The little sailing boat moved briskly along, heeling over under a nice breeze. The boys had the bay to themselves, with no other boats in sight except far to the south. Soon they were docking at the pier on Skeleton Island. It was Pete's idea to ask Jeff Morton for permission to borrow 2 sets of scuba equipment. They would have borrowed a set for Chris too, but they knew Jeff wouldn't have agreed. Besides, Chris wasn't experienced in using scuba equipment. Jeff said they could take some equipment for practice diving, warned them not to try anything dangerous, and hurried off in the direction of Pleasure Park. Pete and Bob got their face masks, flippers, and other equipment from the locker in the motorboat. As an afterthought, they added 2 underwater flashlights. Then they rejoined Chris in the sailing boat. Chris had his own face mask and was confident he could dive as well with it as they could with all their aqualung equipment. The boys relaxed in the warm sunshine, lulled by the gentle bobbing of the boat. After a time, Bob saw they were heading towards the small island known as the Hand, where they had been so mysteriously marooned on their first night. The Hand was about 1/4 of a mile long and several hundred yards across. Now by daylight they could see that it was rocky and barren, uninhabitable. Bob looked for the spout of water they had seen that first night, but there was no sign of it. He mentioned it to Chris. The Greek boy explained that the water was too quiet today. It only happened when the wind was blowing and the waves were rolling across the bay. "Some kind of hole on the island," he said. "Waves rush in here, blow and spout, like whale." He sailed up to within 100 yards of the mid-part of the island. Then he dropped sail and flung a small anchor overboard. "Have to anchor out here," he said. "Low tide now, rocks are too close to surface. Only at high tide boat can sail right up to the island." With the boat bobbing at anchor, Pete and Bob put on their scuba equipment and Chris produced an old but serviceable face mask. They eased themselves into the water. Chris swam about 50 feet, then stood up. The water was only knee-deep. "See?" he said. "Rocky reef here. Come on." They swam over, found rock under them, and stood on a ledge about 5 yards wide. On the island side was a little bay with a sandy bottom, about 20 feet deep where they were. The bright sun showed the bottom quite clearly. "In this bay I find 2 doubloons at one time last week," Chris said. "The other one I find near where you dive yesterday. Maybe we are very lucky today. Find some more here." They lowered themselves off the reef and Bob and Pete inspected the bottom while Chris swam on the surface peering down. They saw seaweed-covered rocks, starfish and schools of small fish. There were lots of crabs going about their business in curious, sideways motion, but nothing that looked like any treasure. Pete signalled and he and Bob rose to the surface. "This water isn't very deep," Pete said, removing his mouthpiece. "I don't think we should waste our air here. We may want to try somewhere else later. Let's take off the tanks and just use face masks, like Chris." Bob agreed. They paddled to the shore, stowed their scuba equipment among the rocks, and swam back out to Chris. Then the 3 of them covered the entire length of the small bay, peering sharply down for the glint of gold. They were not rewarded by any exciting discovery, however, and after a time they paddled in to shore to rest, warm themselves in the sun, and talk. "Today no luck, I guess," Chris said, a bit disheartened. "I sure hope we find something. Father, he is most sick, needs care." "Well, I know another place. I find gold piece once a long time ago. We go there and—" He paused, staring at something offshore. Then all 3 of them became aware of the sound of a powerful motor in the distance. A large dark grey motorboat, old and rather shabby, was heading towards the little cove at high speed. "Somebody sees us. They come to hunt too," Chris said. Then, as the boat did not slacken speed, he leaped to his feet. "They crash on the reef!" he cried. "Hi!" he shouted, waving his hands. "Sheer off! You hit the rocks!" Bob and Pete joined him, waving and yelling. They could see a man in the stern of the boat, an old hat pulled down over his face. Whether he understood their warning or not, they couldn't tell. But abruptly the roar of the motor changed. The boat slowed as if the motor had been thrown into reverse. At the same time, the bow swung round. Still with plenty of speed, the turning boat crunched into the side of Chris's anchored sailing boat. The heavy prow of the motorboat cut into the smaller boat as if it were made of cardboard. For an instant the two boats were locked together. Then the man in the motorboat gave his engine a surge of power. It reversed and pulled free. The next thing they knew, the motorboat was heading back into open water. The three boys stopped yelling. With sinking hearts, they watched Chris's sailing boat settle deep into the water and go under, disappearing from sight. "Golly," Pete groaned. "There go our clothes, our watches, everything." "There goes our ride home," Bob said in dismay. "We're stranded here. Stranded again." Chris said nothing. Only his clenched hands and anguished face said what it meant to have lost the only thing he owned, the little sailing boat with which he had been desperately hunting for treasure to help his father.